Welcome to Master Math series on financial literacy for teenagers. In this series, we're going to try to explain some of the financial principles that you'll need to understand to navigate your world for the rest of your life. When you come to a you try it problem, hit the pause button, try the problem, and then hit the forward key to move on to my answer. I hope you have a really good time today. Today we're going to be talking about paychecks. Well, most of you probably don't get a paycheck. Most of you are students. Your parents are supporting you. This is a good life. But it won't be too many years before you're going to be out in the job market. You're going to be done with school. You're going to get a job. And I'll promise you a couple of things. I promise you that that first job is going to make you feel like you're really rich. You're going to have more money than you ever had before in your life. And I'll promise you something else. You'll have more responsibilities than you ever had in your whole life, and that paycheck will just seem to disappear. It's amazing. That paycheck will just disappear. Well, let's kind of explore that. Let's find out why it disappears. Let's assume you get a job and you get paid weekly, and you work 39.5 hours in the first week, and your pay is $12.85 per hour. That means you earned $507.58 during that first week. Now, we call that your gross pay. Gross pay, what's that mean? Well, the word gross should mean or imply to you big. And the gross pay is the big part of your paycheck. It's the biggest part before deductions are taken out. But deductions will be taken out. They're going to take out deductions from your gross pay to cover a number of expenses. There's going to be a federal income tax deduction. This is to pay your estimated income tax. And let's say, for the sake of argument, that your income tax deduction is $46.18. You're also going to have to pay a deduction for your Social Security tax. And let's say that's $42.79. You'll also have to pay for Medicare and Medicaid tax. And let's say that's $14.72. In most states, you'll also pay a state income tax. We'll estimate that at $22.05. You'll probably be buying some health insurance. And let's say that costs you $52 per week. And if you're smart, you're going to start saving for retirement. So hopefully you're making an investment in a 401k plan. And let's say that's $50 a week. Well, you started with gross pay. You earned $507.58. But do you get to take home that much? No. They're going to deduct all these expenses, and you're going to end up taking home $279.84. We call that your net pay. That's your pay that's cotton through the net of all these deductions. That's how much is left over after you've paid these mandatory deductions. Now, I know you've heard your parents complain and other people complain about how much money you spend in taxes. And it's true. A huge amount of your pay goes to pay for taxes. But you need to remember that you're really buying products and services when you pay these taxes. For instance, 3 of these taxes, federal income tax, Social Security tax, and Medicare tax, go to the federal government. Now, we're going to talk in a few minutes about what that's spent on. And you can definitely argue that we're spending too much on certain things, or you can argue that we're not spending enough on other things. And I'm going to leave that argument to you and your parents. But you are buying a set of products and goods from the federal government. You're also paying some state income tax. And what are you getting for that? Well, you're getting roads, you're getting state police, You're getting school systems. You're getting a lot of services that probably you need and probably you want to take advantage of. Again, you can argue about the specifics, whether too much is being spent on any one thing, or whether some things shouldn't be purchased by the state at all, but you are getting products and services from your income tax to the state. Your health insurance. If you go to the hospital without insurance, it could bankrupt you. If you get sick without health insurance, it can really be costly. So health insurance is probably a sensible thing. And you're also paying for your retirement. You're also investing into a 401k plan. And that's going to help you retire in comfort. So all those deductions are buying you something. Now, attached to your paycheck, or if you've got automatic deposits available to you someplace, will be what's called a pay stub. And typically with a paper check, the top portion is going to be detached from the bottom portion. And the top portion you'll take to the bank and deposit into your checking account. Or if it's an automatic deposit, it will be deposited in your checking account automatically by your employer. Again, in either case, there's going to be available to you what's called a check stub. And this is going to explain what deductions were actually taken from your paycheck. It's going to list your gross earnings, and then it's going to tell you how much came out to pay federal income tax, state income tax, Social Security, Medicare and Medicaid, insurance, retirement, charitable contributions, health care, child care. Then there's going to be a total number of deductions, or a total amount of deductions. And then they're going to calculate your net pay. So you start out with your gross earnings, and you end up with your net pay. Well, now let's talk with a little more detail about the individual payroll deductions, and let's start with federal income tax. In the United States, we have what's called a graduated tax rate. What's that mean? Well, that means that the more money you make, the more income tax you're going to pay. And that you pay more tax on the last dollar you made than you'll pay on the first dollar you made. Yeah, I know that sounds complicated, but let's explore it. Let's say that you earned $83,000. Well, what the government's going to do is break that up into brackets. It's going to say there's a lower bracket that's $0 to $8,500. Now, if you only earned $8,500, then you'd pay the tax rate for that bracket, which is 10%. But if you earned more than $8,500, you'd pay the tax rate for that bracket plus the incremental tax on income that you earned that was above that $8,500. So, you earned $83,000. So you earned all of that first tax bracket. You earned all the $8,500, and you're going to pay 10% tax on it. You also earned all of the second tax bracket. You earned the $26,000 that's between $8,500 and $34,500. And on that $26,000, you're going to spend 15% on tax. That'll be in addition to the $850 of tax that you owed for your income in that lowest bracket. So, of our $83,000, $8,500 was in the lowest bracket, and we're going to spend $850 on tax for that. $26,000 was in the second bracket, and we're going to spend 15% of the income, or 15% on the taxes for that $26,000 increment that's in that bracket. Then we earned $48,500 that fell in this bracket. It was income above $34,500, but below your total income, which was $83,000. So that totaled to $48,500. And for that $48,500, you're going to pay an additional tax of 25%. So you'll pay 25% of this addition plus the tax that you've already owed because of your income in the two earlier brackets. So you'll spend a total on taxes of $4,750 plus 25% of that last $48,500. And you're going to discover, if you check my math, that the $8,500 plus the $26,000 plus the $48,500 totals up to your total income of $83,000. Now, hopefully you notice that as your income goes up, you're paying what's called a marginal tax rate that's higher. At that lowest marginal tax bracket, you're only paying 10% of your income in taxes. In that second bracket, you're paying 15%. In the third bracket, 25%. And it keeps going up, so that really large earners who supposedly could afford more taxes pay more taxes. And people with low incomes pay less taxes. And that is a graduated tax rate. Now, in addition to federal income tax, the federal government collects a couple of other taxes. They collect Social Security tax and they collect Medicare tax. And the total of those three are a great big part of your payroll deductions. Well, what do you get for that? What are you buying? What's the federal government spend that money on? Well, in 2011, the federal budget broke down this way. The federal spending, according to the Congressional Budget Office, was a total of $3,598 billion. And that $3,600 billion was broken down into these categories. Medicare and Medicaid amounted to 23% of it. Social Security expenses amounted to 20% of it. Defense Department expenses amounted to 19%. Discretionary, 18%. Other mandatory, 13%. And interest, 6%. Now let's talk real briefly about what each of those categories of expenditure represents. Medicare and Medicaid pays for health insurance for the elderly and those that are in financial need. Social Security is a retirement program to help seniors retire in comfort. Defense Department expenditures pay for the Army and the Navy and national security. Discretionary expenditures, we'll talk about that in a second. But it differs from mandatory expenditures. Mandatory expenditures are expenditures that congressional law mandates the government fund. If the Congress passes a law saying that the government will do this or that or the other, that requires the federal government to spend money to accomplish it. So those are mandatory expenditures. And interest expense. What's interest expense for the federal government? Well, the federal government sells bonds. They sell it to individuals. They sell it to other countries. And those bonds are really like borrowing money. Either you or your friends or a foreign country can buy that bond, and the U.S. government says, we'll pay you back the money we're borrowing, plus we're going to pay you interest on that. We're going to pay you interest on the amount of money that we borrowed. And the cost of that interest in 2011 was 6% of our total federal spending. Now, there's a distinction that you're going to hear in the news a lot, and that's discretionary spending and mandatory spending. Mandatory spending is, again, anything that's required by a congressional law. If Congress passes a law that requires it, the federal government's got to spend money on it, and that represents about 2/3 of the total federal budget. Discretionary spending are things that the federal government or that Congress has not passed a law mandating, but that the government has over the years added or found necessary to fund. That includes Defense Department. It also includes a lot of other expenses, a total of $646 billion for things that are not mandated by law. Now, you've heard a lot said about our deficit spending, about spending more money than the government takes in taxes, and it's a big problem. So all you got to do to solve it is reduce one or all of these categories of expenditure. For instance, we could just eliminate the Defense Department. We could get rid of the Army and the Navy and the Marines. Wait, I think a lot of people would not want us to do that. I mean, it's not going to be easy to get a consensus on how much we should reduce the expenditures of the Defense Department. All right, let's just eliminate Social Security tax. That'll take out $725 billion. Wait. Social Security, people have been promised Social Security all their lives. They've paid Social Security tax from the day they started working. You can't just yank that out from under them. You can't reduce the federal expenditures by eliminating that. Maybe you can find ways to cut it back, but you can't eliminate it. Medicare and Medicaid. Well, you can argue whether we can afford this, but you can't argue whether it's needed. We can work on reducing Medicare and Medicaid, but it's not going to be easy. Net interest expense. We have to pay back interest on the money that we borrowed. We could argue that we shouldn't borrow as much money as we have, but we are where we are, and we have borrowed that money, and we do need to pay interest on it. And then other mandatory expenses and discretionary expenses. There are a lot of things in there that could probably be whittled away at. So when you talk about reducing the federal expenditure, you got to get a little more specific. You got to talk about what you're going to reduce. Where are you going to take money away from? I'll let you have that argument with your mom and dad. Well, enough about spending money with the federal government for the moment. Let's talk about spending money yourself. And all you've got left to spend after the deductions from your paycheck are made is your net pay. And that's going to be a substantially smaller amount than your gross pay. And it may or it may not be enough to pay for all of the expenses that you're used to having. So you're gonna need to think about that. You're gonna need to think about how much money do I have left after I make my deductions? What is my net pay? And what are the things that I spend money on? And a budget is going to help you understand that a lot better. You're going to need to figure out how much money you take home and then how much money you're going to spend on the various things that you probably find necessary. For instance, if your gross income was $26,000 per year, your monthly income would be $2,167, and that's 100% of your gross income. But after deductions, you're only going to take home $14,560, which is 56% of your gross income, or $1,213 per month. Now, out of that $1,213 per month, you're going to have to pay for quite a few things. You'll notice that the percentages below this line are percentages of your monthly income or your annual income or your annual income after deductions. It's your take-home pay. So one of the things you got to pay for is housing. You're going to have to rent an apartment. Now you probably, if you're making $26,000 a year and you're a young person, you're probably sharing an apartment with other people and you probably don't have to pay for the whole thing. So let's assume that you're spending $350 a month on your apartment or $4,200 per year. That's 28.8% of your annual take-home pay. You probably need food. I put a budget here of $364 a month for food, or almost $4,400 a year for food. That's not a lot of money to pay for food, but it represents 30% of your take-home pay. An automobile. You can't get a great car for $292 a month, but you can get a car for $292 a month, or $3,500 per year, and that'd be 24% of your take-home pay. You're going to need some insurance. You may have some debt to pay back. Entertainment and recreation, going to the movies, going out to dinner. I put in $80 a month for your budget, or $960 per year, but the $80 a month isn't a lot of money. It still represents 6.6% of your take-home pay. Clothing. You're going to need to allocate some money each month for clothing. And I allocated $42 a month for clothing, or $500 a year. That's 3.4% of your take-home pay. Savings. Hopefully you're going to save some money. Let's say you decide, I got to save $1,000 a year for a rainy day. What if I get sick and have to support myself without my job's pay for a while? I better have some savings. So I put in $83 a month, or 6.9% of my take-home pay. Medical, dental. Well, you've got health insurance probably at work, but there's going to be a deductible on that health insurance, so you're going to need to allocate a certain amount of money for medical and dental. School and child care. Well, we're assuming you're a young worker and you don't have children yet, and you don't have child care expenses. And investments. Well, you're not making enough money yet you've got savings, but you better hold it at that in the beginning. And then miscellaneous. There are other things that you're going to end up spending money on. And I've got $50 a month in there, or $600 a year, or 4.1% of your take-home pay. Well, we've got a little bit of a problem here, folks, because our gross expenditure, the total amount we're spending on these things that are required for us to live, is $16,228. But our annual income after deductions is only $14,560. We're short by $1,800. We're spending $1,800 more than we make. We're going to have to find a way to cut some of these expenses and save a little bit on our total expenditures. We're going to have to find a less expensive place to live, or we're going to have to get rid of the car and take public transportation for a year. Or we're going to have to spend very little or almost nothing on entertainment and recreation. There's another way you could attack this problem, and that's called going to the top line. You could go up here and negotiate for more income. Or you could look around for a job that pays more, because the job you've got doesn't seem to be supporting the lifestyle that you're living. Now, the better your education, the longer you stay in school, the easier it's going to be to increase this total income. And I know a lot of days you just don't want to go to school and you just don't want to work hard at it and you don't see the purpose of it. But I'll promise you one thing. In about 20 years, this number right up here is going to be greatly impacted by how hard you work today. Well, that's our lesson on gross pay, payroll deductions, and net pay. Now you can go to www.mastermath.info, and there you won't find any worksheets, and you won't find a quiz, because I didn't think worksheets and quizzes really lent themselves to this chapter. But you will find some cool links to other places that you can look at information about financial literacy, budgets, and taxes. Well, I hope you had a great time. I hope you come back again soon. See ya.